These movies didn't just flop, they sank entire studios, killed actors' careers, and in some cases made the actors literally uninsurable. Christian Slater punching out cops before his movie tanked. Eddie Murphy tanking a $60 million Disney film so hard he never worked with them again. Kevin Sorbo basically killing a franchise before it even got started. Let's see how many of these 90s box office disasters you actually remember. Originally, this was supposed to be another Conan movie, but Schwarzenegger wouldn't come back, so Universal quickly pivoted and turned it into another Robert Howard story, Kull the Conqueror. They cast Kevin Sorbo, signed him to a 3-movie deal, and tried making him their new action star. But Sorbo wouldn't do it unless the movie was rated PG-13. Charles Edward Pogue, the screenwriter, called Sorbo an imbecile who forced them to water down a very adult fantasy property into something safe for kids. He said this later, "Both Dragonheart and Kull fell far short of where I wanted them to go. Dragonheart was disappointing. Kull was a disaster." Universal dumped it right at the end of summer, late August 1997, basically sending it off to die. Reviews were brutal. Nobody went to see it. Made less than $3 million its opening weekend. By week 2, it dropped almost 70%, completely tanked at just $6 million total domestically. Overseas was even worse, barely made $200,000. Sorbo was supposed to do Black Dog next, but 3 weeks after Kull opened and flopped, he mysteriously dropped out, claiming some kind of shoulder aneurysm. His 3-movie deal died instantly. Universal replaced him with Patrick Swayze, whose own career wasn't exactly booming either. Steven Spielberg himself personally commissioned this script by Bruce Robinson, the guy who wrote the cult classic With Nail and I. Neil Jordan signed on to direct and did a rewrite. The movie had a strong cast too. Annette Bening, Robert Downey Jr., all good actors, should have been solid. But it was a mess. DreamWorks released it in January 1999, the dumping ground for movies nobody believes in. Reviews were terrible, and audiences gave it a harsh C- rating. Opening weekend, it bombed with just $4 million, finished behind stuff like Varsity Blues. After 3 weekends, it was basically gone, only $12 million total. Screenwriter Bruce Robinson summed it up perfectly later. "It was a complete mess top to bottom. I thought Jennifer 8 was low, but Christ almighty, this hit the floor and dug." Billy Crystal and Robin Williams had wanted to do a big movie together for years. Then Crystal's agency found this old French comedy, got Ivan Reitman, the guy who made Ghostbusters, to direct, and packaged it up perfectly. Warner Brothers jumped on it, figured with the stars, director, and high-concept idea it couldn't lose, so they dumped $85 million into it, massive money for a comedy like this. One huge problem: the movie was terrible. A Warner insider admitted later they never even looked at the script closely, just saw Crystal, Williams, and Reitman, and greenlit it automatically. When they finally watched the finished movie, they panicked, tried reshoots, tried to fix it, but nothing could have saved it. Instead of opening it on actual Father's Day weekend, Warner bizarrely chose Mother's Day weekend thinking they'd get a jump start. Spent huge on marketing, even had Crystal and Williams cameo on Friends to boost it, but it still bombed. Opened second place behind The Fifth Element with just under $9 million. Warner doubled down, kept spending, hoping it'd magically improve. But in the end, the movie barely made $28 million domestically, totally failed overseas too. Warner lost a fortune, tens of millions down the drain. Early 90s, Steven Seagal was huge after Under Siege. Warner Brothers locked him down to a 4-movie deal. Fire Down Below was originally set up at Sony as Seagal's one allowed outside film. Then it moved back to Warner. But by the time this film finally came out, Seagal was in freefall. He'd already done 2 flops, On Deadly Ground, which he also directed, and it was terrible, and then The Glimmer Man. Warner wanted nothing more to do with him. His ego was huge, his weight was ballooning, he wasn't even bankable anymore. They dropped Fire Down Below quietly into theaters in September. It made $6 million opening weekend, which was actually enough to win, but only because no one else opened anything big. 3 weekends later, it was practically gone. Only made $16 million domestically, almost nothing overseas, straight to video most places. Seagal tried one more time independently with The Patriot, but theaters wouldn't touch it. Had a brief comeback later with Exit Wounds, then spent years doing endless cheap direct-to-video junk. The Bubble Factory, a production company created by Sid Sheinberg after leaving Universal, was a complete disaster. Universal basically gave Sheinberg free rein because Spielberg liked him, and they badly needed Spielberg for the Jurassic Park sequel. McHale's Navy was one of the worst Bubble Factory movies, yet another awful comedy adapted from an old TV show. Directed by Brian Spicer, who'd just done the Power Rangers movie, and starring Tom Arnold, whose studios kept trying and failing to turn into a star. Released in April 1997, critics absolutely destroyed it. One of the worst reviewed movies that year. Opened 7th place, made $2 million, then dropped nearly 60% second weekend. Total run was less than $5 million domestically, 0 overseas. Universal didn't even bother releasing it theatrically outside the US. The studio quickly killed their whole Bubble Factory deal and wrote Sheinberg a big check to leave quietly. Sheinberg himself later admitted, McHale's Navy was a disaster. I'm not pretending it wasn't. This one starred Charlie Sheen, who was already coming off a streak of total failures like Terminal Velocity, The Arrival, and The Chase. It was made by Synergy, the same Disney-backed company responsible for messes like Judge Dredd and The Scarlet Letter. Disney knew they had a turkey on their hands. They dumped it into theaters at the end of January as counter-programming to the re-release of Star Wars, gave it almost no marketing push, and quietly let it die. Reviews were absolutely horrible too. Critics thought it was unintentionally hilarious. It basically opened dead in the water at 16th place, pulling barely over $1 million opening weekend. Dropped 72% the next week and vanished from theaters altogether, making just around $2 million total. After losing millions, Synergy shut down their film division completely, sold their entire library off to Disney, and called it quits. This was supposed to be Reicher Entertainment's big entry into blockbuster action movies after decades of making TV shows. But from the start, they had no clue what they were doing. They spent $1 million on a completely dumb script, hired a 70-year-old TV director with zero experience making big movies, and cast actors who couldn't sell tickets, starting with Ray Liotta. MGM released it, mostly because they were broke and had almost nothing of their own to put out that year. It flopped opening weekend, barely scraping together $4 million. Audiences bailed quickly, and the film made just $11 million domestically and another $5 million overseas. Reicher took a huge loss on it, shut down their film division completely just a few months later, and the only thing they ever got out of it were 2 low-budget direct-to-video sequels. Another Synergy Disney disaster, this time a monster horror comedy directed by Stephen Sommers, the same guy Disney hired earlier for movies like The Jungle Book. Made for $45 million, it got delayed over and over, finally dumped into theaters in late January 1998. Disney marketing screwed this one up bad. They tried to sell it as a serious horror flick, left out all the fun, campy stuff from ads, and didn't even showcase any big monster effects. People ignored it completely. It opened in 8th place with less than $5 million, audiences gave it a pretty bad C+ cinema score, and it quickly faded away. Just weeks later, Synergy officially went bankrupt. Disney even mentioned the film's huge financial losses in their investor reports, along with other flops like Krippendorf's Tribe. Basically, Deep Rising helped sink an entire studio. Mandalay Pictures and Sony put $50 million into this thriller starring Michael Keaton, who at this point had basically become box office poison after flops like Multiplicity and Speechless. Originally supposed to open summer 1997, Sony panicked when Warner Brothers put Mel Gibson's Conspiracy Theory on the same date. They delayed it half a year and dumped it into theaters in January. Critics hated it, buzz was non-existent, and Keaton's star power couldn't save it. It opened in 6th place behind Titanic, pulling less than $6 million opening weekend. It sank hard and fast after that, finished under $14 million domestically, and Sony took a massive financial bath on it. And by the end of that year, after the even bigger disaster of Jack Frost, Michael Keaton basically stopped headlining major studio films altogether. Originally called The Flood, this was supposed to be a big-budget disaster thriller. $70 million, lots of special effects, and Christian Slater starring. Paramount planned it for a prime summer release date in '97, but then realized the market was completely flooded, literally, with big disaster flicks like Twister and Volcano. They delayed the release, renamed it Hard Rain, and tried fixing it up with reshoots. Then disaster struck in real life. Christian Slater went on a coke-fueled rampage. He punched a woman, bit a guy, attacked a janitor, and kicked a cop down a flight of stairs. He got sentenced to 90 days in jail. But because he's Christian Slater, they let him delay serving his sentence so he could still attend the premiere. When it finally opened in January 1998, nobody wanted anything to do with it. Terrible reviews, zero buzz, and it barely made $7 million opening weekend. Finished under $20 million domestically, lost millions more overseas, and became a major financial fiasco for Paramount. This one started way back in 1993, originally meant as a starring role for John Candy, before he passed away. Eventually, Disney got Stephen Herrick to direct. At that point, Herrick was actually riding a huge hot streak for Disney. He'd done The Mighty Ducks, the live-action 101 Dalmatians, bunch of hits in a row. So they figured he'd nail this too. Big mistake. Eddie Murphy signed on in 1997, right after doing Dr. Dolittle. He was right in the middle of a career comeback at the time, thanks to Nutty Professor and family comedies, but this movie just completely crashed. Disney spent real money promoting it. Big marketing push, lots of ads. Didn't matter. Audiences saw the terrible trailer and awful reviews, and nobody showed up. Opening weekend was barely $5 million, landed in 5th place. Second weekend, Holy Man dropped like a rock. By its third weekend, it was making under $1 million. Once theaters took their cut, Disney got back maybe $13 million total, which barely even scratched their marketing costs, let alone the $60 million budget. As for Stephen Herrick, Disney basically ended their partnership with him on the spot. He never directed another movie for them again. In 1996, Kurt Russell signed onto this sci-fi movie, Soldier, for $15 million, his highest paycheck ever at that time. This was announced right before his other expensive flop, Escape from LA, bombed hard. Initially, Soldier was going to be a bigger film. First press releases talked about a $75 million budget. But then production stalled, Russell needed time to get in shape, and Warner Brothers started cutting the budget way back. Director Paul W.S. Anderson later said those budget cuts totally wrecked his original vision. Instead of this big, epic action film he wanted, the final product looked cheap and rushed. Online movie fans totally shredded it, calling it derivative garbage. It opened against Pleasantville and Apt Pupil and got killed right out of the gate. Only made $6 million opening weekend, 5th place. Total domestic run was less than $15 million. Overseas was a joke too, $5 million. When theaters took their share, Warner and Morgan Creek were lucky to get back about $11 million total, nowhere near covering marketing or the budget. This one started with John Grisham, back before he was famous. Early 90s, Grisham agreed to write a screenplay called The Gingerbread Man for a small 5-figure paycheck. But as Grisham got hugely famous with books like The Firm and The Client, studios looked again at the script and said it was generic and boring, totally rejected it. Finally, Polygram picked it up in 1995. Kenneth Branagh signed on as star, but only if he could approve the director, hoping a great filmmaker could elevate the story. So they got legendary director Robert Altman. Altman immediately threw out Grisham's original script and rewrote basically everything. Added swearing, added a hurricane, which apparently Grisham really hated. Actually hated it so much he took his name off the film. Production hit another snag when Altman insisted on casting Robert Downey Jr. At the time, Downey was having major drug problems, and insuring him would have cost over $1 million. So Polygram just decided not to bother insuring Downey at all. Then it got ugly. Polygram hated Altman's final cut, hired another editor, recut the whole thing behind Altman's back, even changed the music. Altman freaked out, demanded his name be removed from the film, and Island Pictures, the subsidiary making it, shut down completely. Polygram tested their own new cut, and audiences hated it even worse than Altman's version, so they reluctantly went back to Altman's original cut. But then, vindictively, they just buried the movie. Total domestic box office was under $2 million. Director Richard Attenborough tried getting Grey Owl made way back in '93, originally with Pierce Brosnan attached. But investors didn't think Brosnan could draw a crowd, so funding never happened. Then, obviously, Brosnan became James Bond and starred in big-budget movies like Dante's Peak, and suddenly, investors changed their minds. Budget ended up around $30 million. Largo Entertainment and allied filmmakers funded it, with lots of Canadian tax credits. But all the major studios and distributors passed. Nobody wanted it. They tried selling the movie at the American film market. 0 buyers. Finally, Grey Owl got a small theatrical release, but only in Canada. 70 theaters, opened under $200,000, quickly disappeared. Total gross was around $600,000. Sony eventually picked up the US rights, but only for straight-to-video. MGM bought the script for Molly in 1997, planning to have Amy Heckerling direct. She turned down directing, stuck around as producer. Budget was $21 million, and it was clear early on MGM knew they had a disaster coming. Originally set for release in April '99, MGM started delaying it, first August, then October, then just gave up entirely. 0 marketing, and they decided to just dump it quietly into a few theaters. MGM cared so little, they forgot to change the date they'd scheduled for airlines. So, believe it or not, Molly ended up premiering on airplanes a full month before it hit theaters. When it finally opened, MGM stuck it in only 12 theaters. Total box office was less than $18,000. MGM ended up quietly writing off almost the entire $21 million.